You've got an average cruiser, low buck, big block Chevy 454. Which intake manifold do you need? Well, we're gonna test them all and find out. It's another Engine Masters intake manifold shootout, this time for the big block Chevrolet with oval ports. This is gonna be sort of a real average cruising type of 454, where the dual plane manifolds that are more oriented towards the street will be like perfectly fit for this engine. I'm gonna tell you about all the manifolds. First, let me just run through what this engine is. It is a 454 bottom end, and it would be similar to something that you would have pulled out of like a 94 Chevy truck or something like that. It has very low compression. It has GM Performance Parts heads, which are roval ports. Remember that the big block Chevy from the factory had basically 3 ports. There was the peanut port, which was oval and tiny. There's the large oval port, which is much larger and oval. And then there's the rectangle port. Then Edelbrock made something that we call a roval, which is sort of a rectangle with very rounded edges. So that's the engine. It's only gonna make like 450 horsepower. Next, the manifolds. I went shopping and was surprised to discover there really aren't that many options, especially if you want a high rise for more power than average. Let's go over what we've got. First, there's the Edelbrock RPM air gap. As you know, this is the manifold we recommend for virtually everything that runs under 6,500 RPM on the street. Sort of our standard. By the way, this example of the RPM air gap is coated black. This one that's on the engine's actually the one we're gonna test. It's not gonna make a difference in power. Next, there's the Speedmaster intake, and I will tell you that to the naked eye, everything about the inside ports on this thing is identical to the Edelbrock RPM air gap. There's some differences on the outside, but I would expect these manifolds to perform the same. Let's get into the much lower rise intakes. First, the Edelbrock Performer 2 oval port. This one is the lowest height. It's also got the smallest ports of any of them, and I believe it's the oldest design of any of them. Moving up in height, we've got the Wyand Street Warrior, and then the Summit Racing intake, which is taller than either the Performer or the Street Warrior. And I mention that just because hood clearance might be an issue for you. A Corvette, like a Stingray, is a perfect application where you probably need a lower intake if you want to run a conventional stock hood. Also, for your information, the 2 Edelbrock manifolds are designed and cast and machined in the United States, and all the others are Chinese. So that's kind of the roundup. You know, we've learned that you can't glance at manifolds and really determine what they're going to do. But if you look at them, there is some interesting stuff. You can see that the Edelbrock Performer and the Wyand Street Warrior are the only 2 that are designed to accept a spread-bore carburetor like the Rochester Quadrajet that would have come factory on a lot of 454s. I think it's funny that the Wyand Street Warrior has a different waffle pattern on the floor on each side. I don't know, fuel distribution stuff. The Summit has a giant notch taken out of the middle of the plenum between the 2 planes. Who knows what that does? That's what we're here to find out. All right, let's talk to the Steves and then fire up our gutless 454 and find out which one of these intakes is best for you. All right, guys. We've ridiculed this engine in the past.
Stop.
What?
We're setting ground rules right now.
What's that?
Ooh. We will not be calling it Clifford one more time.
Clifford,
this
the
is
big
now
red dog?
known as the Merc 7.4.
Well, my point was going to be, it's actually the perfect engine to test these intake manifolds.
It's designed for these intakes.
This is what I used to do, pulling a 454 out of a truck or like out of your Suburban, throwing some heads and a cam on it and go.
Yeah.
They make 480 to 500 depending on the compression and, you know.
Well, and this thing doesn't have much compression. These Mercury Marine motors, they were like 7.8 to 1 from the factory. This has got a little smaller combustion chamber, so gosh, we might have even bumped it up to 8.2.
Yeah, but still, I think it's typical. It's a good way to throw together a cheap big block and have more power than a cheap small block.
Agreed.
And it's exactly the right thing for these intakes.
Yeah, agreed.
What's the first one we're testing here?
This is Speedmaster, not necessarily for any particular reason, except after sorting through and pre-fitting. We wanted to make sure we had everything fit, pre-fit, no gasket problems, interference, that sort of thing that we've run into in the past. So that just happened to be the one that we ended up with on last and figured we'd bolt it down.
Let's run the Speedmaster and see what our baseline power is.
Let's do it.
That is a dog.
I could hear that thing barking from here.
That is a dog. We're testing a bunch of intake manifolds on our 454 big block Chevy, and the very first one here is the Speedmaster, and it made 537.8 pound-feet of torque at 3,600 RPM and 465 horsepower at 6,000 RPM. The first thing we noticed is the massive spread, 2,400 RPM between peak torque and peak horsepower. Wow.
That's actually a really good thing.
Well, I guess, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's making peak horsepower at 6,000, but it's not making a lot of horsepower at 6,000 now, is it?
It doesn't make a lot of horsepower because it doesn't make a lot of torque either. And that's, in my opinion, because it's 8 to 1 compression. A typical 454 with 10 to 1 compression would be in the 565 to 575 range as far as torque. This is down at 537.
The horsepower, it seems kind of low for that tall of a RPM peak.
It's kind of 1 horsepower per cubic inch.
I guess so.
It's 8 to 1.
It is what it is, I guess.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that we can't compare the different intake manifolds, in my opinion. I think it's an application, like I said, where you would be running the dual planes.
I can't tell you how many times we've taken truck motors, 454s, out of trucks, put them on the dyno and switched to a large oval port head or, cam them up. Because you're limited on camshaft, too, because there is really no valve to piston clearance in these things. So you're very limited on cam, and they make kind of, 460 to 500, depending on what you do with them.
Can you take the motor out of my Suburban and make it a 500 horsepower 454?
Yes,
I can.
Be thrilled with this in your Suburban.
I know.
You
I
absolutely would be. That is what it is. Let's go to the next manifold. Continuing with our 454 intake manifold shootout, we've tested the Speedmaster, and now we're going to the Edelbrock Performer 2.0 for oval port. Remember I was pointing out that manifolds don't always bolt right up? Check this out. The end rails are touching the engine block right here. That means even if I put some silicone in there, it's gonna leak, because see how the manifold just walks around like that? So on this particular intake, and this might not be true on your engine, by the way, it's just on this combo, we are going to have to stack gaskets. So the intake gaskets will be 120 thousandths thick, which you can actually buy in the aftermarket. You don't have to stack them, but that's what we're gonna do. Steve, do you mind gluing them in place? The next manifold that we tested is the Edelbrock Performer 2 oval port, and this is the intake that's designed for peanut port heads, and we think that's reflected in the power numbers here. The horsepower was 436.2 at 6,000 RPM, and the torque 532.5. So that's a big nosedive in horsepower versus the first intake, but surprisingly, the torque is the same, 532 versus 537.
Yeah, it's visibly a lot smaller intake manifold as far as cross-section and stuff.
And lower and everything else.
Yeah, it's all of it. I mean, I think it's designed more for truck general purpose kind of applications, not so much for what we're trying to do.
Let's show exactly how much you don't want to choose that for, you know, a roval port head or a big oval port.
Or this.
Yeah.
That's a big drop.
The red lines are the big high-rise intake with the larger ports in it, and the black lines are the low-rise performer with peanut ports, and you can see the penalty you pay. It's the wrong manifold for the cylinder head.
Yeah, for this application at wide open throttle, it's just not the correct choice.
Yeah, it's not moving air. That's the problem.
Yeah, it diverges, it kind of says that, shows it.
But then again, it's 436 horsepower. I think it must have been designed on like a 396 or a 402. Actually, peanut ports didn't even come out till it was a 454.
No, and when you think about the truck applications, you're talking more like 330 horsepower, not even into the 400s.
Remember, they made 290 from the factory.
I know.
That's what probably they were designed for.
Yeah.
The carbureted junk, they were hideously slow back in the day.
I had one, I know.
So were the TBIs.
They were also.
Right.
Yeah, but this is obviously designed way back in the era of a carbureted 454 motorhome. It's flanged for a quadrajet.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a performance intake. It's a...
And it's reflected in the power numbers.
Totally.
Yeah.
We got 3 more manifolds to go, and the next one's gonna be the Wyand Street Warrior.
The Wyand Street Warrior is almost fully installed. Then we're in the dyno, firing this thing up and seeing the power it makes.
Manifold number 3 is gonna be the Wyand Street Warrior. Our next small port, low-rise intake was the Wyand Street Warrior, and honestly, it's got better numbers than the Performer 2 oval port. Still not what you would really want to see. 446.5 horsepower at 6,000 RPM and 535 pound-feet of torque. Once again, making the same torque way down here.
Yeah.
Right.
But then they just fall off. And I think we were talking more about that Performer in this as well, thinking in a truck, they never run past 4,000.
They don't. I mean, 4,400, if you leg it out, I mean, they're just not that kind of engine speed.
But nonetheless, compare it to the Performer. And the Wyand, which is a newer design, I believe, is way better. Wyand in the black lines and the Performer in the red lines. Bottom line, I wouldn't buy either one of these manifolds for this application.
No, not for this application, certainly not.
So far, the Speedmaster is still in the lead, but the air gap is still to come, and that's the standard by which we always judge these dual planes. But the next one we're gonna run is still small port, but bigger than these last two. It's sort of a tweener, and it's the Summit intake. Let's see if this thing fits. When we're fitting it, what we're looking for is bolt hole alignment on both sides and the gap right here at the end, which in this case is pretty good. All right, Steve, you want to slop it?
How much of a gap is there?
1/8 inch. Here's the data for the Summit Racing dual plane. The horsepower 451.5 at 6,100, and the torque 518 at 3,500, which doesn't mean a lot till we compare it to the Wyand Street Warrior. I find the peaks are often deceptive, and it's normally what we just ran when we were magazine editors.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and before there was software where you could do graphs, everybody made that mistake of just looking at peaks, and that did not tell the whole story.
Oh, here's why you need to look at the whole thing. The Y-end is in red and the Summit is in black. The Summit picks up a little bit at the top end, but I'm not trading that for this meat in the torque curve, especially for an engine like this that would be in a lower end application.
No, absolutely, I agree with you.
Now, David,
Steve will take that.
well, I'm not too sure, but would you say that can be attributed partially, at least, to the way the center divider is cut way down?
The Y-end is cut way down. You think that's what's going on up here?
It helps it
Or down
on
here?
the top end.
Yeah.
It also can hurt it on the bottom end. It's like adding an open spacer.
Oh,
you know, we
true.
see it tilt the curve just by adding an open spacer.
And that's what we've got, is the tilted of the curve.
Yeah.
The Y-end is winning at every point below 4,700 RPM, and it's winning above 6,000 RPM.
The reality of it is this is really not a 6,500 RPM engine anyway. So I'm absolutely going to head for the Y-end.
Yeah, me too.
Versus the Summit manifold. I mean, it just spends so much more time down there.
Are you willing to concede?
I'll give it that, yeah.
Okay. Normally, Dulcich picks the highest horsepower regardless.
Okay, I'll go with the highest horsepower. That Summit is clearly superior up top, so that's the one I choose every time.
All right, here comes the Edelbrock air. Here are the peak power numbers for the Edelbrock RPM. The horsepower, 469.9 at 6,000. The torque, 540.3 at 3,500, which appears to be just a speck better than the Speedmaster.
What a surprise, an Edelbrock Performer RPM air gap doing well.
Once again.
It wins every single time. Let's look at the overlay to see if that's actually a true fact. The one that looks identical. All right, the black lines here are the air gap, and the red lines are the Speedmaster, and you can see that the Edelbrock is just a speck better.
Yeah.
And made in America.
Made in America. You did a lot of measuring I saw over there when between takes you had the calipers out and you were measuring port heights
did.
and widths and sizes and...
Well, the Performer is the smallest, followed by, I think, the Y-end or the Summit. Maybe those were the same. And, of course, the Speedmaster and the Edelbrock RPM were identical.
appropriately sized for this cylinder head.
Yeah, seemingly. Yeah, you know what surprises me, I think, about this whole test is, aside from, you know, these last two high rises, there's not a good intake manifold for a 454.
Well, I mean, in this application, this is the standout, but the rest are just kind of, they're in there somewhere.
I think that they're for the application we were talking about earlier, where it never revs above 4,000 and it makes a little more torque down here.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, let's look at the best of the low-rise intakes, which I think was the Y-end. This is going to be a comparison of the best torque from one of our low-rise intakes versus the air gap high-rise intake. So the red line is the air gap and the black line is the low rise, and there's no chance I'm ever choosing the low rise for
No, you know,
It's better everywhere.
the wine compared well to the other low-rise intakes, but still
Well, it was the
comparing
best
it
of
to
them.
this, comparing it to this is still better from 3,000 all the way up.
It backs up the thing that I've tested and always said, which is the RPM makes more power than the low-rise intakes. I don't want to say always because I end up being wrong. Virtually always.
Yeah, I'll go with that.
I'll go with that.
You and I ran a stock-ish, I don't know, we ran a 224 at 50, 305 one time.
Yeah.
And we put the RPM on it, and it made more power than the baseline low rise.
It seems to be the one every
Yeah,
time.
there's no reason not to run it on a mild engine even. I've run into that a lot when people are asking me for advice and they say, well, what intake manifold should I get for this engine? And it's just a mild combination. Put the air gap on it.
RPM, yeah.
Or the RPM, which is a,
The difference would be hood clearance, like your Vet, for example.
right.
Yeah,
Not when I put the L88 hood, I'll have
There you go.
clearance for the air gap.
You know, I would have almost expected to have one that was kind of a hot street application and one that was a truck application to see some tilt in the curve, and we just don't. We just see that this RPM, and ours is an air gap style, but we see where the RPM just is a really good manifold.
What do you say we never do a dual plane shootout again And we just go, the RPM is best.
No, we still have
It
to
is.
test.
I guess so, but we've
Yeah.
done it on what? Small block Chevy, big block Chevy, small block Ford, both 302 and 351, and 440 Chrysler,
Well, then we have 360 left,
360.
Mopar.
We haven't done, no, you've done small block Mopar, for sure.
Have we done it here?
Not on the Engine Master
Not on
show,
the
but
show.
we've done it for journalistic publications.
So the question is, how many
460.
intakes are even available
Yeah.
for a 360?
A lot.
Once again, are there? Really?
yeah.
Still?
Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe that's an idea for next time. Do you want to see it? More intake manifold shootouts? We've done a whole bunch of them, but there are more engines to go. 460 Ford, Pontiac, Oldsmobile, small block Mopar, going
Buick.
down the list. We never run out of ideas on Engine Masters.
That's a nice bead.
Yeah. Ooh, I'm shaking.
I know. How come?
It's,
And he got the skip jump spot.
I did. I'm having to pull pretty hard, so I'm shaking.
These ones.
Why are we even using the tops?
Why did Sir Edmund Hillary climb Mount Everest? Because it was there.
This is not Roco Garage. This is Engine Masters. This is a serious show.
What is oil viscosity? What does it do in your engine? Can it make power, and why? All of that this time on Engine Masters. Our new sponsor is Driven Oil, and they're letting me do something I've always wanted to do, which is a test of various viscosities of oil. They said, you know, we're not sure what you're gonna find out on the dyno, but hey, let's go for it. So what we're gonna do is look at a couple of different viscosities, and we're gonna do horsepower, we're gonna do temperature over pressure, and we're gonna compare the two viscosities to see if there's a difference in temperature over pressure, to sort of get an idea of the viscosity index being the oil's ability to maintain its viscosity over a broad range of temperatures. All right, this can get kind of complicated, and so let's go over some oil basics. First of all, what is viscosity? It is a measurement of a fluid's resistance to flow. A higher number is thicker, a lower number is thinner. So therefore, a 520 oil is thinner than a 2050 oil. The thing you need to understand, which I didn't and a lot of people don't, is that the viscosity test for the high number, for example, the 50 in 2050, is handled completely differently than the W number, the low number, the winter number. Here's what that's all about. Let's say you got a 2050 oil. The 50 is measured at 212 degrees. And to simplify it, they basically put it in a test tube with a metered orifice and they time how long it takes to flow out of the tube. That's how it's measured. But on the W number, the lower number, the 20 in 2050, it's totally different. That is a measurement of resistance to spinning. They take sort of a vane and put it in a bath of oil and spin it, and the lighter the oil, the faster it spins. Therefore, they can sort of extrapolate the oil that will flow best at the coldest temperature, and they kind of then adjust that to rate for an SAE viscosity rating. It's fairly complicated. The main thing that you need to know is that the W rating, the 20, is there because oil manufacturers wanted to be able to have a thinner oil on cold startup so that it gets all through the engine as quickly as possible. They just didn't want to have wear and tear on startup. There's a whole lot of other stuff in oil that is tuned for your specific application. Next, let's talk about this GP1, which they recommend is like their ultimate hot rod oil. The GP1 is a semi-synthetic, and they admitted to me that, you know, the way the oil industry works, it can have a very, very low percentage of synthetic in it to be called a semi-synthetic. Apparently, the thing about the GP1 here is that it's good for hot rods because it has the potential to make power because the additive's in it. And it's really good for fuel contamination, like if you're running methanol or if you're running E85 or if you, like us, run your gasoline car way too rich and you get a bunch of fuel in the oil. They've got additives that prevent that fuel from breaking down the oil and causing it to be thinner. It will stay thicker longer with contaminants in it. In the hot rodding world, a big one is main bearing and rod bearing clearance. Let's say you've got 3,000th rod bearing clearance, which is fairly big, and you're doing that because you've got like a supercharged application. Another application could be really, really tight, like perhaps a new LS that is 1.8 thousandths. And the thing is, you need a viscosity of oil that matches what that clearance is. Thinner for a tighter clearance, thicker for a bigger clearance. That's one of the main things because you want to maintain what's called a hydrodynamic wedge, which is the lubrication that is between the crankshaft journal and the bearing to separate the two of them so they don't touch and so they don't shear the oil. Wow. That's a lot of stuff, and honestly, it's real basic because there's a lot more to it. Now, the two oils that we're gonna be testing here are a 5W20 and a 20W50. I wanna find out, does one make more horsepower than the other? But what's really interesting is looking at the different temperatures you can run at. Remember how the high end of the SAE rating is based on 212 degrees? We're gonna run these oils at 212 degrees, but we're also gonna run them down at 100 degrees. And what I wanna look at is how pressure and power changes when you have different temperatures. But the other thing to do is to compare the two oils to see if one of them diverges and has a bigger problem maintaining that viscosity index than the other one. So that's the oil test. What's the engine we're gonna use? Honestly, it's kind of a weak Chevy 454 big block. The bottom end is a Mercury Marine crate engine. It's got like 7.5 or 8 to 1, and that's the problem with it making big power. We're guessing that the camshaft in it, based on the power curve, probably has 224 duration at 50,000 tappet lift. It's probably a CompCam's XR276HR hydraulic roller. It's got the GM Performance cylinder heads on it, which were made by Edelbrock, and the intake manifold is an Edelbrock RPM air gap. Up top, we have a 750 Holley on there, and it's got a product that isn't available anymore, which is Percy's jet plate. So you can just turn a screw and adjust the jetting. So that's what the engine's all about. Now I'm gonna sit down with the Steves, and then we'll have a little bit of a discussion and start to make noise and see if there's really a difference between different viscosities of a really good quality oil. We don't even know what we don't know. We're gonna find out as we go.
Isn't that normally the case?
I guess so.
This time more than ever, maybe. Because,
totally.
yeah, this kind of information you just can't come by that easily.
No.
You know, this is one of those tests to me that sounds so easy, but the more you think about it and the more you figure out how to get it done, it becomes really complex.
Well, that's gonna be on you because the big thing is, well, it is, is gonna be the control of oil temperature and water temperature. And the reason for that is the water temperature affects horsepower. And if we're trying to look at different horsepower between two oils, then we need the water temperature the same, but we also need the oil temperature the same. So that's gonna be hard, but you can do it. I think what we're gonna do is start with our thinnest oil, go to the thickest one. So the first one going in is going to be the 5W20 driven GP1. I'm in the control room here with Steve because we're keeping an eagle eye on these two fields right here, which is oil temperature and coolant out. We really need to keep that stuff repeatable, which is difficult. And so we're gonna kind of look at this first test and agree on where we should start pulling the engine based on what we think we can duplicate with the other oils?
Yeah, you know, it's not unusual at all when we're testing this stuff that we kind of figure out some of our test procedures during the first set of testing. That way we know that we can duplicate it through each of the tests and be accurate so we can compare back to back.
So now what we're gonna do is heat up the oil by running it at about 3,500 RPM under a fairly big load. And then we'll try and cool the coolant temp back down and run it again. At 225, you'll see this frame turn red. There we go. Right, now we shut it down and wait for the coolant to cool, and hopefully the oil stays fairly hot. As a reminder, this is with the Driven 520 oil, and I'm gonna start by giving you what's actually the least important data at this point, which is the horsepower and the torque. The torque is 541.4 at 3,500 RPM, and we made 468.8 horsepower at 6,000. But before we have another oil to compare that with, really, I think the story is in the oil pressure.
Yeah, I think so too.
Here's our oil pressure curve cold with a peak of 66.9 PSI and a nice curve. We got
Beautiful curve.
No windage garbage or anything like that happening up at the top. If we have a windage problem, we often see the pressure just, you know, do this and then
Yeah,
up at the
it gets
top
ugly.
end. How about hot? Our peak with hot oil is 53 PSI. You can see that the hot oil has lower oil pressure everywhere because it gets thinner. And what's interesting is that hot oil is honestly where the spec is for the 50 weight, because it's at 212 degrees, which is what we ran it at.
Yes.
So that's right at that number. The question is, does the hotter oil make more horsepower? So now we go back to the power curve and compare those two things. Pretty good. The black lines are the cold oil, which was about 100 degrees, and then the red lines are 212 degrees. And you can see that the hotter oil makes a little bit more power, as we've seen time and again. It's no mystery.
You know, ask any drag racer. It's hot oil, cold water, that's how it's gonna make the best power.
With the hot oil, our peaks are higher. The torque is 544.7, also at 3,500 RPM, just like it was before. And the horsepower, 472.4 at 6,000 RPM. So yeah, up a few numbers everywhere. The thing I'm really curious about, though, is what happens when we pour the thicker oil in. If we see any difference or, you know, trends that are not the same as far as how quickly it gets hot, what the difference is in pressure, all those things.
I'm curious too, because I can't tell you how many times a drag racer will opt for a thinner oil because he can't heat it up like we did. So instead of a standard oil that's got 212 degrees, he's gonna go to a 0 or 10 weight oil at 100 degrees, and it's gonna have the same sort of viscosity, looking for that power.
What's interesting is I was speaking to Bill at Driven Oil about exactly that, and he was working with the guys who run in the NMRA, where it's Coyote stock. It's ostensibly a stock engine, they drag race them. He said a bunch of the people were running that 0 weight oil, but they were actually losing ring seal. And what they would do is they would pour in an additive that would make more power, and they go, hey, I make more power. And he's like, well, you could have just run the thicker oil to begin with. So it's not always about the thinnest oil to make the most power.
It's not. It really is a combination. I mean, when you look at the higher levels in drag racing, comp eliminator, pro stock, those sorts of things, the ring technology is way out there. I mean, they're like 1.2 millimeters. Pro stock stuff is even as thin as 28 thousandths. They're gas ported. You know, ring seal has, they've really gone to a lot of extremes to get great ring seal. So they're able to get away with that. A regular stock eliminator car, not so sure that that's beneficial to start running 0 or 10 weight oil.
Interesting. So the next test is going to be with thicker oil, and I hope that we can derive things about whether the thicker oil is hotter at the same coolant temp than this is, because that's what the theory is, but that's not what your real world experience shows.
Going back to what you said before, one of my fears is running a really thin oil under a high load situation, like a lot of power, a lot of pressure on that contact interface can, you know, squish that really thin oil out, especially when it's very hot.
The hydrodynamic wedge, that's why you want a thicker oil with a larger bearing journal clearance, and also why guys with superchargers tend to run heavier viscosity, so you're not displacing
the ultimate
thinner oil.
example there would be a top fuel motor.
70 weight straight is what they run in top fuel engine.
But I'm going to be curious, when we put the heavier weight oil in the engine, I mean, how much of a penalty are we really talking about in power, if any?
Well, you can go burn your hands and drain it out, and I'll go ahead and pour the new stuff in.
And then I'll find out.
Let's change the filter, too. That makes sense.
I'll take a nap.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
All right, changing oil for power and pressure. There's our cold oil run just to observe. It looks like the oil went from 100 degrees to about 119 on that pull. Now our chore is to get the oil up above 212, like 225 degrees, shut it off, and cool the coolant back down to 125. There's 225.
Or 225.
Yeah, it took longer and it took a hotter coolant temperature to get there. This will be interesting. Let's go sit down with Dulcich and discuss. First up, we've got the 2050 cold. The peak numbers here are 539.2 pound-feet of torque and 464.4 horsepower. But now we're going to overlay it with the same oil run at a higher temperature. And after looking at the last test with the thinner oil, this shouldn't surprise you too much. Sure enough, the hot oil makes more power, to the tune of 548.5 pound-feet of torque and 478.5 horsepower. That's big.
That's a huge difference.
Yeah, I like it a lot. Now what we're looking at is oil pressure, cold versus hot with the 2050. So the peak oil pressure when it was cold was 73 PSI, and the peak when it was hot was 60 PSI. Once again, the hotter oil gets thinner.
Thinner, sure.
Right, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not 50 weight when it's hot. That's the thing that I think is sort of a mind boggler. We ran it at 212 degrees. That's where oil is rated, so that's where it's a 50 weight, not out of the bottle, not cold out of the bottle.
I got you.
Right,
Okay.
pore viscosity is different.
No?
Yes,
How
no?
does that compare to the thin oil is what I'd like to know.
Let's have a look. And what we're looking for here is to see if the viscosity index is different between the two oils. The black lines are 2050 cold. The red lines are 2050 hot. The green lines are 520 cold, and the blue lines are 520 hot. And it looks to me like the gap is about the same.
Pretty similar.
Yeah,
I
it's-
remember it was 14 and change pressure differential on the thin oil and 13 and a tiny bit on the thick oil. So.
And of course, the reason that the thinner oil's lower pressure is just because it's thinner to begin with.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so I don't think that's very instructive. That's not really teaching us that there's any big breakdown based on temperature between these two oils.
No, it's just kind of what you would expect as things heat up. Thinner is going to have less pressure, thicker is going to have more.
And the thin oil versus the thick oil didn't do anything differently.
No.
That's what we're deriving from that. The last thing that we should look at is the temperature gain between the two, which I'm going to assume is going to be the same because the pressure was the same, right?
That would follow, yeah.
Our next graph is showing us if one of the oils gets hotter during a dyno pull than the other. And by the way, the scale here, from here to here, is 1 degree.
Yeah.
So it might look drastic, but it's not. It's 1 degree. The red line is the 520, the thinner oil. The black line is the 2050, the thicker oil. And basically, wherever it starts dictates where it finishes.
Yeah.
That's what this gap is.
And it kind of train tracks. It's the spread is the same basically throughout the run. It's 1 or 2 degrees difference throughout.
Yeah.
I
So
don't
it's
see
the
any
same.
significant change or variation on how fast it's heating up.
Not at all. And maybe we're just dealing in a range where both of these have a viscosity index good enough that they just don't care. We don't know.
There's a lot of data here, more than I thought we really had initially. And, you know, not a surprise, we always learn more as we go, but there's a lot to sift through here as far as what's happening and what's going on and why.
But wait, the most interesting thing is coming up right now. All the rest of this is just stuff that doesn't affect your life. The next one makes Dulcich and I really, really happy.
Ta-da.
And there's the myth buster that is going to change your world. The red lines that made more power are the thicker oil. That's the 2050. The thinner oil made less power.
Right.
Because most people think you pour in really thin oil because then there's less resistance to pumping, there's less windage loss, you know, less frictional loss, all that stuff.
All of those things are correct.
But
that's not the story.
it is overcome by the fact that the thicker oil contributes more to ring seal. All right, let's conclude. I think the first thing I've got to do is walk back my enthusiasm for the 2050 because honestly, the whole ring seal theory and the more power, the thicker oil is unusual at best. Like the guy at Driven told me, thinner oil will always make more power up to the point of it compromising ring seal.
Yeah.
And we've seen that in plenty of testing. Thinner oil makes more power.
Yeah, over and over again. This engine may be a little bit unusual. You know, it's got wider rings, a ton of laps on it. And in this case, maybe this is a bit unusual just because it did help ring seal. That's the only explanation for that divergence in the curve.
It still opens up a subject I had never considered. I didn't know that oil could contribute to ring seal.
And by a pretty dramatic margin when you look at the horsepower gain up at the top.
Yeah. So that's my big takeaway from the episode is that it has that potential, but it doesn't mean it's going to happen every time. As a matter of fact, it's probably going to happen in rare occasions. The other thing I think we have to admit here is that through all our struggle to look at temperature over pressure and viscosity index and everything else, I think honestly the dyno doesn't have the capability to push the oil to the point where we can really conclude on that.
Oil testing becomes a huge volume of information. I mean, this is only just a piece of it. You know, when you look at the lab testing, you know, we've done oil testing in the past where it goes to the lab, it goes to the dyno, it goes to the race team, and then makes that circle 2 or 3 or 4 times before they actually settle on a blend that everyone is happy with. So it goes on and on. There's a lot of depth to it.
So I think more talking and thinking than hard data here. An unusual result with the power. I learn something every time, and this was one of them, ring seal from oil.
Once again.
Yep. Maybe we can dig up more freakish power gains. That's kind of what we do on future episodes of Engine Masters. This episode of Engine Masters is just simple and fun. It is an air filter element shootout. This time we're gonna find out which color air filter element makes the most power. Not really, but kinda, because man, you can see they come in a variety of colors and styles. There are so many air filter elements available on the market these days. I just want to do a quick shootout to find out if there's really any differences in any of them. So you're gonna get 2 things. You're going to get paper elements versus cotton elements, oiled elements, and then you're also gonna get a brand-to-brand shootout. So I bought everything that I could that appeared to be different that was in stock at summitracing.com at the time we did this show, which is June 2023. I brought my crib notes because I wanted to give you what all these are and what the prices are of them, starting from cheapest to most expensive. First, we're gonna test an All-Star Performance paper filter. That one is $12.99. Mr. Gasket paper filter, $15.72. Then Summit has their own line of air filters, and now we get into the cotton gauze oiled air filters. These are available in blue black, or red. Strangely enough, red is $34.99, and you can get the other colors for $26.99. I don't think there's a difference in performance. It's just the colors. Next up, we have one from Spectre Performance. This is $31.99, available in red or black. I got the black, which I thought was pretty cool. Edelbrock sells one that's called the Pro Flow in blue, black, or red. That's $34.95. Then we get into the green filter. That's actually the name of the company that sells them. It's not just the color. The green filter is $58.42, and then the K&N is $77.99 on sale at the time we're shooting this. They're normally $89.99. Now, as we test these, one thing we cannot do is judge the value of the filtration on any of these. We don't have a way to contaminate them uniformly, and we don't have a way to sort of analyze what particles are being passed through them. So this ain't that. This is going to be a power test, but I can also sort of give you some observations on each one of these. The two paper filters, I really wanted to get a super cheap one that hardly has any pleats on it, and I couldn't find that. And so the All-Star and the Mr. Gasket are extremely similar, though clearly not made by the same company. They're not the same exact thing. The thing I'm talking about on pleats is air filters can often be judged on how many folds they have, you know, per inch or all the way around the thing. If they have very few folds, that means there's much less surface area on the filter, and that's gonna tend to mean that it won't pass as much air and that it won't catch as much dirt and stay cleaner and useful as long as if you have a whole bunch of folds, but I couldn't find a super cheapie. So that's just a little bit of information that applies to both paper filters and the cotton gauze. Other observations that I've got to get into are that the only two here that are made in the United States are the green filter and the K&N filter. Now, I got to lead with K&N because this is the company that actually popularized high-performance cotton gauze air filters. They did it way back in 1969. They really invented this marketplace, at least as far as I know. And that product, while it is the most expensive, I will tell you sort of just based on intuition and handling it and fondling it, it's the highest quality unit here. It fits better, the folds are more consistent, the way the wire is like embedded in, it seems more solid, it's a little bit heavier, so that is the nicest unit. The other one made in the United States is the green filter. Here's the thing about that. I took the green filter, and I took all of these actually, and held them up to the light and looked through them. That green filter, you can see a lot of light through the thing. You can actually see some voids in it. And I'm like, what is going on with that? And I wondered to myself, how can this filter anything compared with these other guys? And I read up on their flyer, and here's the deal. They say that they use less cotton layers in their filter than, for example, the K&N. And they say that their oil magnetically charges the screen so that it can catch negatively charged dust particles. I suppose the cotton is there then to catch the positively charged dust particles. There's no way we have to verify all of that. However, the company's marketing does explain why that one seems to be more see-through than the others. What we're gonna do is throw all of these on one engine and just test them, and essentially we're gonna look at horsepower and find out what the airflow is on them. What engine are we gonna use? My 408 LS. Super simple. All we're really using it for on this episode is to suck air and find out which filter is best. Okay, guys, ready for the least ambitious episode of all time? Yeah, this is gonna be simple and easy, but when I came up with the idea, you're like, dude, people ask the question all the time, so here we are.
No, it's like our discussion, you know, I mean, some of the most basic things really are what guys are the most interested in.
No, I want to know too, and I think we learn something every single time, but I do want to add a little bit something other than just air filter elements. I think we should still test it just with an open carburetor. In the past, we've seen that it loses power with a dropped base. I think we should run through that again.
I think we saw that with a drop base with an element. I wonder about just a drop base.
That's true. We could run just a flat base, just a drop base, and then start putting filters on it after that. Yeah. However,
oh boy, money time.
We're not going to see a difference of more than just a dyno variance of 2 or 3 horsepower with any of the filters, including the paper wood.
Ooh, I'll take you on that.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You will?
Oh, you betcha.
Okay.
No, I'm actually going to go with you and bump Dulcich another 20.
Okay.
I'm in. There's going to be more than 1 horsepower difference between them.
That's not what I said.
Dyno variation.
So do we call that 2 or do we call that 3? 3.
3? Get out of here, Brule. 3?
We can't just look at peaks either. We're gonna have to look at the average. We're gonna have to agree that it made no difference.
All right, I'm going all in.
So we have a friendly bet on the table about what's gonna happen with the air filter elements, but first we're gonna fire it up and run it with no air filter on it at all, and then we're gonna probably fiddle around with some bases, and then we'll get into the elements. Steve, let's see our baseline. On the open carburetor, nothing modifying it at all. We saw 508.6 pound-feet of torque and 541.3 horsepower. So let's run out there and we'll test both the flat base and the drop base, and then we'll come talk about what happened.
Perfect.
Our first test with no filter and just a base is with the dropped base. And now the flat base on the carburetor. Steve's about to pull up the test with the dropped base on it so we can compare it to what we saw with nothing. Whoa.
That's a lot.
The comparison here is the black line is with no base on it, and then we put the dropped air filter base, and look at the power it picked up. It made 5 horsepower up top. I bet you the flat base does the exact same thing.
You're talking one.
Yeah, the flat base does the exact same thing. It is 1 horsepower difference. We're not counting that. So legitimately putting some sort of air transition into the carburetor helps.
It helps.
Which we've seen many, many, many times. I just didn't
surprise.
expect 5 horsepower all the way up top.
Well, the reason I thought it was kind of cool to put a base on it is because you see so many guys at the track, if they're drag racing, they'll take the filter off. But I see some guys with no base and some guys with a base, and I think it's important. One is to kind of keep the engine temperature away from the air inlet, and then to contour it as well.
And also the reason why it makes 5 horsepower up there and not down here is simply airflow demand.
At
It
a much
makes bigger
higher speed,
difference.
so that contour makes a bigger difference.
Yeah. When we do our filter testing, which base do you want to use?
I want to use the flat one.
Yeah. We'll test it all with flat, and then I think at the end I want to go in and test with a filter, the flat and the dropped.
I think that's a good idea.
Now we're gonna start testing filters, and we're gonna run in there and test our 2 paper element air filters, and then we'll come back and pick a winner on that, if any.
Our first test is going to be the All-Star Performance 14 by 3-inch paper element. That's the cheapest filter in the test. I'm going to add this paper gasket. You'd be surprised how much dirt can get right between this edge and the carburetor air horn. And all set, ready for testing.
Now the basic paper element from Mr. Gasket. What's on the screen right now is the power with a flat base, but no filter on it at all. So let's see how much power a paper air filter element kills. Black lines is no filter, red lines is with a filter, so that you can see that you do lose some grunt everywhere in the curve by adding that paper filter.
Pretty significant from top to bottom.
How did the Mr. Gasket do? Now we're looking at a comparison of these 2 paper filters. The red lines here are gonna be the Mr. Gasket. The black is the All-Star. They're the same. Those 2 paper filters really are identical. I think the worst part of all of this to me is that I couldn't get a Fram filter. That's the one that I always used when I was a kid because I wanted that orange rubber on there.
That orange rubber was
That was the key.
Yeah.
Yeah. So honestly, I think most of these paper filters that have a pleat count like this are gonna do that. The next thing that we're gonna test is all of the oiled cotton gauze air filters. And I think I wanna run those maybe in order of price. Does that sound right? So I think the first one up is gonna be the Summit. We're into our air filter element shootout. We've already seen that our paper filters kill a little bit of power versus no filter at all, but now we're looking at our aftermarket oiled cotton air filters. First one up is going to be the Summit brand oiled cotton gauze air filter element. And the cool black looking filter element is from Spectre. Next up is the Edelbrock ProFlow. Can you guess which filter this is? It's the green one. And our last filter, the biggest name in the aftermarket, K&N. We just came back from testing a whole bunch of oiled cotton gauze air filter elements, 5 to be exact, and we've pulled up the power curves of all of them right here on the screen. And as you can see, they're all pretty much the same, but there are differences. So on a zoom in, that's the difference right there. It's interesting. You can actually see they're fairly well grouped together, except for the green filter, which happens to be the green lines, actually is up ahead, but it's by a really minute amount. So among all of the oiled elements, the difference in peak torque is 1 pound-foot. And then the difference in peak horsepower, 2.8. Then the average, meaning the average from the whole range of RPM, 2.1 on torque and 2 horsepower. So that's, that's the difference that we're looking at.
Amongst these brands,
amongst all of these filters. So while this looks like it's standing out right here, if you look at the scale, at best, it's 2.8 horsepower. So we established that I believe that all of our oiled filters are essentially the same, although the green was just a speck better by a horsepower or 2. So what we're gonna compare here is that green filter that was the best of those to the worst of our paper filters. And I might add that by worst, I mean by 0.6 horsepower. And so that is going to be the All-Star paper filter in the black lines and the green filter in the red lines. So you can see, in fact, the difference between a paper filter and the oiled filter can be significant enough that we need to do this. Although I misspoke at the top of the show, because what I meant to say is all of the oiled filters are the same. And what I said was all the filters are the same.
Thanks, you just lost 40 of my dollars.
I did. Yeah, I know.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, you won, because the ultimate gap here, remember we said that we would go within 3 horsepower? Well, at peak horsepower, the difference here is 4.4. And at peak torque, it's 2.7. I still would think that we would see it closer here and further apart up there.
Well, and we are, as far as, if you look at the power curve, it kind of, it does do that.
Well, regardless, I think we know that the paper filter doesn't make as much power as the oiled filters, but I think we also assume that the paper filter filters more.
Yeah, looking at those 2 filters, you cannot see through one of them.
Yeah.
The other one, you can look right through it.
Well, the other consideration on these, though, is how much dirt can they hold before they start to degrade performance? That's one of the claims to fame of, like, I think K&N initiated that entire concept. And the other thing that Steve and I have dealt with before on Roadkill and Roadkill Garage is driving through a massive puddle, driving in the rain with your paper filter.
You get a paper filter wet and it won't let any air through it. As a matter of fact, you'll just suck it right into the can.
The next thing is I really want to try the drop base versus the flat base. Which element do you want to do that with?
The green.
Do we want to, though?
Oh, yeah.
You do?
Oh, absolutely.
Because it was the best one?
Yes.
I think that's fair.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now we're starting our last test. First up is going to be the green air filter with a flat base, and then we're going to change it over to the dropped base and see what happens. And now the drop base. This time, we really didn't see anything. There's one little glitch on one data point where the drop base actually made a little more power, but all throughout the curve, nothing this time.
I wonder if part of that has to do with the demand, too. I wonder if this might show different results on an 850 horsepower engine where there's a lot more demand and you've restricted that area.
And I'm not sure if we tested it earlier on a carburetor with a choke horn.
Yeah.
Because the choke horn
Right.
sticking up off the
Good
top of the
point.
primaries is going to get way closer.
That's a really good point. And if we did that, then there's almost no room there. I've measured that. I've seen it. It's like it shuts it down to almost nothing. The drop base is actually always kind of, in my experience, showed to be kind of a nice contour and entry into the top of the carburetor. So,
Well, and while picking at minutia, to be fair, this green filter made the most power. I mean, it made more power than no filter at all. It might be making the airflow a little bit more linear through there.
we're just using that at this point because it doesn't seem to be at all restrictive. It's a spacer
Right.
between
Yeah.
the bottom and the top. So we've still got basically an open bottom that's contoured.
All right, I am prepared with conclusions for this entire episode. The first thing is there's nothing here that we can declare at all about filtration quality on any of this.
No.
Yeah, so just to reiterate that. The other thing is all of the testing you've seen here is going to apply at this power level. It's not going to matter if you've got a 283 running 10,000 RPM making 500 horsepower, or if you've got a 540 that somehow only makes 540 horsepower.
It's about the
It's
airflow.
going to be about the same.
Not seeing huge differences, I would say that anything from this power level down is fine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you are dealing, as you said, with 850 horsepower, these things are going to start to be more of an issue. I think what we saw with these filters all being virtually the same, I mean, within 4.5 horsepower, which earned him $100, that there was nowhere to go at all, because when we ran no filter and then added the paper and it only killed 5, well, it's not like the other ones were going to be able to add 20.
No, small gains and losses.
Not necessarily in order. I think we just found out that not in all applications does it matter whether you have a drop base or a flat base. And earlier than today, I would have said, oh yeah, we tested it. Flat bases can kill power.
And it's also going to depend on the top.
The other thing is what we've seen, I'm going to say every time, is that some sort of a base or plate or velocity stack is always better than an open carburetor.
Yes.
It just smooths that transition at the edge.
Yeah.
I think we learned that paper, as far as we have seen, let's say it tends to kill power versus no filter at all. And that the oil filters tend to make more power than the paper filters.
By a little bit.
In this case, it could be bigger in different applications. I think we can also say the 2 papers that we tested made the same power. I really wanted to find one of those papers with like no pleats in it that had almost no surface area. It might have made the same power, but it would have clogged much faster.
Yes.
The oiled filters that we tested, they were really all the same except for this green one, which made another couple horsepower. And maybe there's a reason for that. Looking through it and reading their brochure and watching the power, it's like, okay, I don't know if it filters anything, but it did move more air.
Yeah, that was kind of an interesting explanation on how it actually filters. But it's not because of layers of material. It's some other magic that's going on there with positive and
Ionic
negative
bonds,
ions.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I think that's about it, other than the pros and cons of oil versus dry, which is oiled filters cost a lot more, but
A lot more one time.
you can wash them essentially forever.
Yeah.
If you're a guy willing to do that.
Are you?
No.
Neither am I.
I end up not having time, and one time I did it years ago, I made a mess of it. If I get a car that has an oiled filter in it and it's a caked up mess, as my junk tends to be, I throw it away.
I'm willing to wash them.
Yeah.
And it's not so much even having to re-oil them and spend all that extra time. I'm just willing to wash them. As I'd mentioned earlier to you, I even have a K&N filter in my heating and AC unit because I take it out and I go wash it off and put it back in.
Yeah.
And I bought one filter and now it's been there for, 8 or 10 years.
And you're
So-
not throwing away as much junk.
And honestly, I don't want to sound like Mr. Greenpeace, but that's truly,
It is.
I felt bad about throwing away just garbage and, because I was changing that filter once a month. And so now it's one time and I'm done.
Well, that turned into a lot more conversation and thought over something that I thought was going to be just a totally brain-dead test. I hope you picked up something from it, because we learn something every single time we do this show that's called Engine Masters. Okay.
Oh, well.
I love guys like this, where you just go, no, we're going to really bet now. We're not just going to wand things around. And all of a sudden, have you ever noticed that same sound in their throat when they start to choke?
You know I'm good for it, guys. All I have are hundreds in my wallet.
It's okay, I've got change.
Your valve springs and push rods could be costing you power and reliability, and you wouldn't even know it. Find out why this time on Engine Masters. This episode could answer questions that you didn't even know that you had. Here's the situation. In a pushrod engine, can pushrods and valve springs affect power even in a situation where you don't have a valve float problem? That's what we're gonna find out. Here's the thing. Let's just look at the valve springs. You know, if you put a really heavy, beefy race-type valve spring in an engine, perhaps you've put a breaker bar in the front and you've turned it over and you're like, man, this takes a lot of power to rotate this engine. Does that mean that it kills power if you're running the engine with a stiffer spring? It must, because it takes, more work to turn it over. Second thing, you know that when you're setting up your valve train, you might have a pushrod in there and a spring, and you're measuring lift. You know that valve spring flexes right there on the engine stand while you're testing it. But does that happen while the engine is running? And if so, how much power does it lose and what can you do about it? Those are the things we're gonna explore here, all with the help of the guys from Comp Cams. Let me start out by digging a little deeper into the tech of how this all works. Now, the valve spring is what we're really gonna be focusing on here in terms of how much pressure that puts in the system. Now, the other thing we're gonna be looking at is flex in the push rod right here. Note that I've intentionally done my artwork here so that the push rod is not directly in line with the lifter. You can see it's off like this to an angle a bit because that's how it is in a lot of engines, including this big block Ford. And the thing is, when that lifter is moving up and the rocker arm's over here and it's pushing at an angle, that rod can bend. And when it does, it's gonna reduce the lift at the valve because it's gonna take up that motion in here. The other thing that it can do is affect valve duration because as that thing bends, it's not imparting lift at the valve. Therefore, the lift at the valve is happening later and closing sooner, potentially, and we're gonna look at that in this also. Now that we've got all that covered, let's talk about valve springs and sort of how they're measured and how the pressures on them can be determined if they're light or if they're heavy. Let's imagine that this right here was the surface on the cylinder head where that valve spring is seated, right there. And then, I guess I'll draw a valve so that you get the picture of what I'm talking about. And then our spring is here. And then you've got a retainer up here, the thing that has like the little keepers in it and locks and things like that. So what we call installed height is the distance from right here, where the bottom of the spring is, to just to the underside of that retainer. That distance right there is installed height. And the thing is, when you get a spring straight out of the box, it can be really tall like this one right here. But when you install it, it's already been compressed a little bit, even when the valve isn't open. And typically you would see this at like, 200 to 100 on a big block. The big block Ford is unusual. It actually has an installed height of 1.880 inches. So we know that's our installed height, and we can measure with a special tool what the pressure is on the spring at that installed height. The initial set of springs that we're going to run has 210 pounds. Now that's often called valve spring seat pressure. The thing is, it's not pressure, it's actually load. You'll get engineering strokes that'll tell you that's not pressure because pressure includes a unit of area, like pounds per square inch. It's actually load, and it is. It's 210 pounds, not PSI. Now, the next thing that we're going to look at is, let's say we've got that same spring, but this time, this valve is open down here like this. So therefore, the spring has been compressed. And once again, right here, you've got the underside of the retainer, and right here, you've got where it's sitting on the cylinder head. You can see that it's been squished. Now, let's just say that it's been squished so much that the valve is at its peak lift, or what we call on the nose. That would be the maximum load that that spring is going to see, is when the valve is all the way open. In the case of the first set of springs we're gonna test on this thing, it has 550 pounds. Now let's talk about what we're going to go to. Here's real world examples of the parts that we're going to be using. This is the spring that's in the engine right now, and it runs perfectly. It doesn't float the valves or anything, and we're gonna install this. You can see that this spring is much taller. We're gonna have to squish it in here into that installed height of 1,880. And when we do, I can tell you that that seat load is no longer 210 pounds. It is 350. And when we've got the valve all the way open, the load is now 800 pounds. That is an increase of 45%. Now that's pressure that we don't actually need for this engine to operate properly, but it does answer the question, does adding that much spring pressure and that much drama in rolling the engine around actually affect power? That's what we're gonna get into. But that's not the only thing that we're gonna test. We're also going to look at that push rod flex that I described, how this thing can become a spring and get all bendy. And to do that, we're gonna run 2 different push rods with each of our different springs. I've got one push rod that is an 80,000th of an inch wall thickness. See, the push rod's basically a tube. It's hollow, you can see through it. And so the metal is 80,000ths of an inch thick. The stiffer push rod that I've got is 135 thousandths, so this should have greater resistance to bending. It's also way heavier, but does that matter? These are all the things that we're gonna find out. This is gonna actually be super interesting. It's not something that you see tested very much, if at all. Steve Brule thought of this, and I think it's genius, and I can't wait to learn. We're gonna learn with this engine right here. This is a 514 cubic inch big block Ford. The key that you need to know here is that it does have a solid roller camshaft. Everything that we're testing here really should be reserved for solid rollers as far as the heavy spring pressures, because if you have a flat tappet cam, running way too much pressure like this can wipe out that surface from the lifter to the camshaft. And if you've got a hydraulic camshaft, too much pressure might cause issues with the little plunger and piston and valve that are inside the lifter. So this is solid roller territory, as we love on Engine Masters. All right, I'm gonna go talk to the Steves, and then we'll fire this thing up and find answers to all these crazy questions. All right, this is gonna be an interesting test that came straight from the mind of Brule.
Ooh, that sounds interesting already.
Yeah, the whole valve spring thing. So our initial test with our 514 Ford is going to be with our light spring, which is 210 pounds on the seat and 550 open. And we've also got the thinner wall push rods in it, right?
85 wall.
So it is 85 wall, which would be 0.085 inches wall thickness on the push rods.
Baseline of Steve-O.
Well, that's the other question. Will we see the thinner push rods start to flex and lose power with the heavy spring?
2 or 3 or 4 questions that can be answered.
It's gonna be great.
Yeah.
One test at a time.
All right, fire it up, Steve.
All right.
We just made our very first test in the hunt to find out if heavy valve springs actually kill power, and also if flimsy push rods kill power. Right now, we've got the lightest of the 2 valve springs that we're gonna run and the flimsiest of the 2 push rods, and here are our power numbers. 659.9 pound-feet of torque at 4,500 RPM, and the horsepower is 648.9 up at 6,000 RPM. There's not much left to talk about. That's just is what it is.
It is what it is, and it's good.
So the next thing we're gonna do is run into the dyno cell and rip it apart and put in stiffer push rods. Right now they're 085 wall, and we're gonna put in 135. Yep. Ready?
I think it'll surprise you.
I hope so. our stiff pushrod torque number, 660 pound-feet, and the horsepower, 652.6. I sort of desperately hope that the stiff pushrods actually made a difference.
Me too.
Look at the overlay. Stiff pushrods are in black, and flimsy ones are in red.
So it did.
Wow. It really made a difference up here.
You know, when I was looking at some of the data before I walked in, it looks to be about 5 up in that area. I mean, I was a little doubtful initially.
Yeah?
With this amount of spring, if that would be that big of a difference. And I think the real proof in the pudding will be is when we put that 800-pound spring on it.
Sure.
Because if that thinner push rod or weaker push rod is flexing and deflecting and losing lift,
Or
it's going to
breaking.
become more exaggerated with that bigger spring.
Wow, this actually makes me happy.
I know,
It's
me
better
too.
Because I
everywhere.
didn't know if we were actually going to see anything.
No, it's better everywhere.
So I'm really anticipating these results being more radical when we go to the really stiff spring and the flimsy pushrod, which is what we're about to do. Or should I say it's what Troy's about to do, because this is going to be a lot. Here's our power with the 800-pound heavy springs and the super spaghetti pushrods. 658.5 pound-feet of torque and 643.7 horsepower, which seems lower
Seems
than it
lower.
was before.
Only because it is low.
Oh,
Show me it.
let's see.
Have a whole bunch of spring on it.
Oh, look at this. The red lines are the prior test that had the lighter springs and the heavier push rods. The black lines are what we just did with the beefy springs and the flimsy push rods. The thing you can't explain is this.
No, it's...
What if the heavy spring is somehow
Controlling better?
controlling better down here and the push rod's not in distress yet?
Yeah.
And then the push rod starts to go away right here.
Oh.
And then makes more power up there.
What if the pushrod's deflecting and not giving as much lift, raising low-end torque?
And duration if it is flexing.
Yeah.
That's a good one. That's way better than mine.
I am getting
That's
smarter
way
after all.
better than mine. You're right. Think of that. That was genius. What Dulcich is saying is that the pushrod's bending, therefore reducing duration on the camshaft, and we know that reducing camshaft duration makes more low-end torque, and that's what's happening. That's genius, Dulcich. I love that when we come up with
Thanks,
excuses that sound plausible.
No, you know, there's actually some merit to that. You know, the proof is going to be when we put the stiff push rod back in it, it should tilt the curve back the other way.
If that's in fact the problem.
Yeah.
But yeah, we lost a lot of power going this way. And to be clear, the reason we believe that we're losing power is because that push rod is flexing, giving up
deflecting.
lift, giving up duration, and just making a mess of the
Or
whole thing.
is it because the spring is heavier and it's harder to turn?
Well, let's put in the heavier pushrod.
Okay, yeah, we're not going to know really what we're knowing until we throw in the 135 wall push rods, and even then we might not know, but we can come up with excuses because it's what we do. No?
No. Well,
Facts coming up on Engine Masters. Here we go. We just set this up for the final answer about whether valve spring tension has the potential to kill power. We've got our heavy-duty springs in this thing. We've also got our beefy push rods. I'm going to make Steve fire it up on the dyno, and we're going to have a look at the power. Here's our power, and actually it looks like we're gonna conclude the stuff that we wanted to see. The torque with the heavy spring and the heavy push rod is 659, and don't forget the 0.9 pound-feet of torque, and the horsepower is 651.6. Let's look at the overlay of this, and it's gotta be compared to the lighter spring with the stiffer push rod, which is the best power curve we've seen so far.
heavy push rod.
Uh-oh. They're exactly the same. There's a little bit of a something up there, but for all intents and purposes, the light spring and the heavy push rod and the heavy spring and the heavy push rod make the same power, the conclusion being that at least in this test, adding 45% more valve spring pressure over the nose does not affect the power curve.
I agree.
My whole interest switched gears as soon as I saw what the better Pushrod did, even with the other spring. It was like, okay, I wanted to go into this looking at valve springs. And you said, well, let's throw some Pushrods in there too, and let's do that. The guys at Comp loved that idea, doing both. And like I say, halfway through, I just went, oh my God, this isn't about the valve spring at all. This is about the Pushrod.
Well, but still, clearly, the whole thing about, you know, the engine turns over harder with a wrench when it's got heavier springs on it doesn't translate into any kind of a loss.
No, it does not.
Yeah. But the Pushrod, you know what we have to see? Let's look at a comparison of either one of these tests with the heavy spring with the light Pushrod. Yeah, look at that. This is a comparison in red of the stiff spring and the light Pushrod, and black is the stiff spring with the good Pushrod. And look at that, massive difference.
Yeah, I would have never caught that, honestly, between us guys. That whole thing about the Pushrod deflection causing the camshaft to actually be smaller.
Appear smaller.
And change something at the bottom, I wasn't prepared for that at all.
Yeah, I didn't see that coming either.
It's so repeatable, I'm very confident, and that's what's going on.
Yeah, and the reason Steve's saying that this is repeatable down here where the flimsier Pushrod makes more torque is because we saw it with both sets of springs, and it goes back to Dulcich's observation that the flexing Pushrod reduces duration.
It does tell me that the other spring is adequate.
Oh, yeah.
The 550-pound spring is adequate for this camshaft because we made the same power, same torque. It was identical. It was the Pushrod that was really significant in helping it pick up.
Let's talk about that in particular. We didn't need to add the stiffer valve spring to this, and there are, in fact, downsides to that, because you might be sitting there going, I might as well stack the biggest spring that I can get on my solid roller camshaft. There's no downside. There is. You're going to wear out parts more. It's still going to flex the Pushrod, and it's still going to have rocker arm difficulties, like it's more strain on the rocker arm could break. Yeah. And the axle on the roller lifter.
I was just going to say the lifters. It's a higher strain on the lifter. So
and the seats. You can pound out the seats if you have a lot of closing load.
The valve seats. So while there are downsides to having too stiff of a spring, the question is there a downside to having too stiff of a Pushrod?
I'm not seeing that here.
No, not here. But I think a lot of people have the question, well, the stiffer one is way heavier than the thin wall one. But does it matter over on that side of the rocker arm?
I think it's insignificant over on that side. I mean, that's kind of what we saw. This Pushrod is certainly heavier than the 85 wall or the 80 wall.
And I think that's all the notes that I've got. So our final conclusions are run the lightest spring you can that still controls your cam, but if you go too much on the spring, it's not going to have an effect on power, and there's no downside to running the stiffest Pushrod you can. And we can also conclude that you really want to have stiff rocker arms and rocker arm studs, or above and beyond that, shaft rockers.
Right. I like the shaft rockers. They're so much faster to adjust.
Yeah, there's a lot of betterness about shaft rockers.
Yeah, certainly is.
Yeah, what's a good test for shaft rockers? Could we actually get something with like 1,100 pounds over the nose and run it on a rocker stud versus a shaft rocker?
You know, when we talk about deflection, this has got a regular stud in it. If this had shaft rockers on it, would it pick up even a little more?
I'm not sure if we'd see that on this engine, but I think we could do it with something more hardcore.
Yeah, certainly.
And more hardcore is what I love. Anytime I can pull it off on Engine Masters. The thing you can't explain is this.
No, it's...
Oh, yeah, I can explain it if you want me to. Of course. Because the spring takes more power to turn the engine?
But the heavy spring's making more power right here.
I thought you said I was getting smarter.
Can you not snack in the middle of the tape?
Are you chewing?
Oh, God.
He just shoved that beef stick right there on his throat, too.
You want a basic low-risk nitrous plate for an extra 200 horsepower? Well, we're gonna show you the difference between a spray bar plate and perimeter discharge. love nitrous oxide. You touch a button, you get tons and tons of horsepower. I've done it forever with carburetors and plate systems, and man, it's great. But I've always wondered, what is the difference between a carburetor nitrous injection plate that has the spray bars on it and one that is perimeter injection? It sprays it all around the edges. So that's what we're gonna find out here. Before I get into that, let me just touch you up on how nitrous works. In a carbureted application, what we're gonna do is bolt a plate underneath the carburetor, and it's either got that perimeter discharge or the tubes in it, the spray bars. And what it's gonna do is inject extra gasoline into the engine. Now, to burn that extra gasoline, we're also gonna add nitrous oxide. Nitrous is stored in your container bottle as a liquid. It discharges through that orifice and becomes a gas. Nitrous goes into the combustion chamber and it releases oxygen. Oxygen allows you to burn that extra fuel. Burning that extra fuel gives you more horsepower. The other way it gives you more power is by chilling that intake charge like crazy. Here's how we do it. That plate is fed by a couple of nitrous solenoids. They're an electric on-off switch. So you've got nitrous oxide going in the nitrous oxide solenoid, and on the other side, you've got fuel between 5 and 6 PSI going into the fuel side. And that's as simple as it is. All you do to install it is bolt that plate in there, throw some wiring on it, chuck a bottle in the trunk, and boom. You probably also need a nitrous bottle heater. And what we're doing here is a 200 horsepower shot. All of that stuff I told you about, extra fuel and cooling and everything, you just touch a button, you get 200 horsepower. That's adjustable based on jets that you can put on each end of the plate. Now, the thing that gets different here is how we are introducing the fuel and the nitrous into the engine. First, there's the good old spray bar system. This one happens to be from NOS. The way it works is it has a top bar, which is just a tube here with holes drilled in it, and that one is carrying the nitrous. Then you've got the bottom bar, and that one is carrying the gasoline. Now, the way it works is that the fuel is injected at this angle, and then the nitrous is injected on top of the fuel at this angle. So the fuel squirts out at 5 or 6, 7 PSI, low pressure, and the nitrous is at about 900 PSI. So it intersects those two so that it disperses the fuel into the nitrous oxide into the intake manifold. And in this particular spray bar plate, there are holes just for each cylinder. There's 8 fuel and 8 nitrous. You can buy other designs that have a whole lot different thing, like a big shot plate has a bunch more spray holes in it and things like that. So that's one tactic to get the fuel into your engine and the nitrous oxide. This is the one that I've used forever. It's all I've ever used, to be honest. Then there's this style right here, which is a perimeter discharge. Now, it also has that shear of the fuel like I was describing on the 2 different holes on the spray bar, but the holes are all around the edge of the plate. It's actually 2 pieces here, and when the nitrous comes in, it travels in a channel all the way around, as does the fuel, and it sprays out of holes all the way around the edge. This is something that was popularized by Zex nitrous oxide, and I've used them in the old days when they first came out, just sort of for testing. I've never done an A/B test between the 2 plates. And what we're gonna do here is not really look for which one makes more power. I'm curious which one is more tunable and how it reacts to this particular intake manifold. Now, the interesting thing is that Zex and NOS supply different jets for different horsepower levels, meaning a jet that goes into a nitrous plate is sort of like a carburetor jet. It has a metered orifice drilled in the thing, and you might see a 73 and a 64 jet as the tune-up for the Zex plate. That would be bigger on the nitrous and smaller on the fuel. The NOS tune-ups on the newer stuff are staggered like that, but on the older plates like this one, they would recommend like a 74 and a 74, the same size on both one, and we know that that runs a little bit rich. It's a little bit of an antiquated tuning setup. What I wanted to do here is run both plates with exactly the same jetting so that we could compare them equally. And so what Steve Brule did is modified the Zex plate to use NOS jets, which, by the way, I would always do because they're more common. They're easier to come by at a typical speed shop. The Zex jets and the Holley jets are different. And those jets that we're going to be using, at least initially, are going to be a number 73 on the nitrous side and 65 on the fuel, with about 6.5 PSI of fuel pressure. So that's what we're gonna do. And as we spray the nitrous in each setup, we're gonna be looking, of course, at power, but also the tune-up. We're gonna look at air-fuel ratio globally and also cylinder to cylinder to see which plate might have the air and fuel distributed and nitrous better in the intake manifold. It's gonna be interesting. Here's the engine that we're going to test it on. This is my own 408 cubic inch LS stroker setup. Obviously, it's a General Motors LS series engine. The bottom end started life as a 6-liter iron block. It's been stroked out to 408 cubic inches. It's all forged bottom end. It's got large ring end gaps for nitrous oxide. That's something that you should really do if you're building an engine and you know you're gonna spray it. Even at a 200 horsepower increase with the nitrous, you don't want the ends of the piston rings to butt from heat. It just causes all kinds of problems. So this is set up for that. It's also very much a tame street drivable engine. The compression ratio is only 9.3 to 1. That's really low. And the reason is I'd initially built it for boost, but the thing is that also makes it just that extra level of safe on nitrous oxide. So about 2 points less compression than I would actually build it for if I was just gonna run the thing around without nitrous or without boost. The camshaft is also very small. It's a hydraulic roller, of course. The duration on the intake side is 225 at 50 thousandths tap at lift. The cylinder heads on this thing are 259cc inlet runner. They're from Blueprint Engines. And we're gonna run a carburetor up top this time. It is on a General Motors single plane intake manifold. And I point out single plane mostly to tell you that common knowledge would say if you're gonna run plate underneath a carburetor with nitrous oxide, you want a single plane. In truth, we've tried it on dual planes in past episodes of Engine Masters and actually improved cylinder to cylinder distribution on the dual plane. But the results that we're gonna see here with these two plates might be different if you were dealing with a dual plane. In fact, they might be different on different single planes, but it's still gonna give us some information on what could happen. Now, of course, I'm running it with a carburetor, and it is a Holley XP 750 CFM. Because the LS engine doesn't have a distributor, we're gonna control that with an MSD box to pull timing out when we're on nitrous. So there you go. I'm gonna sit down with the Steves, and we're gonna run my glorious little LS motor on a 200 shot of nitrous oxide with 2 different plates. Here's the thing. This LS makes 540 horsepower. What's your rule? 30%?
30, 35, that's a safe number.
30% is 162 horsepower gain. His rule is that it is safe to use nitrous oxide up to a 30% gain on the engine's base horsepower, 35.
Yeah, like on a 500 horse deal like that, or something, I'd go up to 175. I wouldn't really want to go anything past that.
Yeah.
So I think the jets we chose are kind of in that area.
We're gonna run 72 nitrous jet on both of these things.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it'll be pretty good. We're gonna fire it up now and run the thing without the nitrous and just get ourselves a baseline, and then we'll start to rip on the gas.
Yeah.
Go?
Go.
Go.
Thank you.
Bye.
You know, it's interesting to look at our power curve here because we've run this engine a bunch, including yesterday for a different episode, and it made 500 pound-feet and 545 horsepower. And now our power numbers are 516 pound-feet of torque, and it's making 560 horsepower. The only differences are we added 2 nitrous plates, so that's a 1-inch stack, right?
Yeah, that's basically a 1-inch stack because we've got a plate that is 1 inch. This is a 1/2-inch thick nitrous plate, so we put a 1/2-inch phenolic on top of it. It's just so everything was the same for all the plates.
So it's just like running a
1-inch
open
spacer.
carb spacer, and it
Yeah.
made that much difference. Anyway, pretty good baseline power. What are we gonna do first? We're running the NOS, just regular bar plate.
Single old bar.
Yep. And you've got the 72 jet on the nitrous side.
Yes.
And what's on the fuel side for a jet?
We've learned from experience that it takes a smaller fuel jet than nitrous jet. So what we have in it now is a 7264 is where we're gonna start. I think that'll give us a pretty good close call. We can adjust fuel pressure, maybe even a thou jet from around there, but we want to just make it where the tune-up's good and we can just run it from plate to plate.
Yeah. You're gonna learn something, Dulcich.
Oh, yeah.
We've gone through all our safety checks before we run nitrous. We've set the flowing fuel pressure, we've made sure that the solenoids work, we've made sure that the ignition timing is retarding, we've opened the bottle with the engine running just to make sure that the nitrous isn't leaking through the engine, through the solenoid. Everything is perfect. The first one that we're going to run is the NOS conventional plate, just with 2 spray bars in it. After that, we'll get to the perimeter plate and then doing some stuff with the crosshair. But right now, standard cruising model NOS plate with a 72 nitrous jet. We'll see the power and we'll see our tune-up. I know the first thing that you want to know is the power that we just made with nitrous oxide. It is 774.2 horsepower. I'm good with 775 on that. And the torque is 724. The thing is, those numbers really depend sort of on where you hit the button, especially the torque. It's going to change pretty radically if you stab it, you know, at 4,000 or if you stab it at 5,000. The thing is, we're not just looking for horsepower in this episode because, come on, we know that nitrous oxide makes horsepower, and if you don't like your number, you just put in a bigger jet. That's it. What we're looking at is the tune-up. So where do you want to start sort of analyzing that?
Well, I know that we could put more timing in it to make more power. There's a few things we could do, but where we started specifically for a reason was to start to look at cylinder-to-cylinder stuff. And so I think that's probably what we should look at next.
I agree.
Yeah. This is a chart of all the different cylinders. The thing is, if you look in the mid-range, let's pick 5,500 RPM, we have number 8 cylinders at 16.7 to 1 air-fuel ratio. That is scary, scary lean. Really, we would like to see this thing at 12.0. Does that make you happy?
I'm not nearly as concerned about that 17 to 1 number as you are because it's momentary. And nitrous is under so much more pressure than gasoline. You are always going to have a 2 to 3/10 of a second long spike in air-fuel ratio. So it's not a matter of what the number is, it's how long it's there.
Okay, you're right, there's 17 here when you hit the button, but then 16, 16, 16, 15.6, 15.8, that still scares me.
This is obviously an issue. But when you look over here and you see something that's 15 and now it's dropped to 13,
right,
or something that's 14 and dropped to 12, those numbers are acceptable.
I think what we're thinking is that when you have a spike lean, it's because the nitrous oxide gets to the cylinder far faster than the gasoline does.
Yes.
The gasoline's at 6.5 PSI.
Right.
The nitrous is at 900 PSI.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly.
But it's still got lean holes. I mean, even down here at 6,000 RPM, I mean, 15 to 1 scares me. The rest are like 12. With a plate system, you can't pick one hole to fix.
No, and that's what really bothers me about this. So what we're probably going to end up having to do is give up some power in one or more cylinders to try and correct that number 8 so it doesn't burn up.
It seems to me that our only choices here to fix that 1 or maybe 2 lean cylinders are try and put a big carburetor jet in the right rear to see if we can get more fuel to number 8. I haven't had a lot of success with that, but we could try it. Or globally change the fuel and the whole thing, make it all richer just to save that 1 cylinder, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, those are both solid approaches to try. But the first thing I'd like to do is go take a look at a spark plug. You know, sensors do go bad. Bosch sensors, NTK sensors, they do fail at some point, and particularly with leaded fuel. So what I want to do is go take a look at the spark plug. That's the first thing that sees combustion, and we're going to be able to tell whether it's really as rich or lean as we suspect that it is.
On that same line of thinking, would it be a good idea to swap the sensor on 2 different cylinders and run it again and have a look?
Absolutely.
Okay, so those are what we're gonna do to make sure we don't blow up my LS motor. All right, let's have a look at Mr. Sparkplug. We pulled out this number 8 spark plug to see if it had anything going on, and it looks flawless. If it had spatters of aluminum on it that would have come off the piston, that would be really bad. Instead, we're looking deep on that porcelain, and there is like what, a 32nd or 16th of an inch tall black ring around the bottom of it, which is perfect. The other thing is you can read the timing requirement or the timing like performance a little bit by looking at where it burns on the ground strap. And if you don't have enough timing, it'll be over here by the tip. If you have too much timing, it'll fold all the way over here to the edge. You want it right there at that bend, and that's where we're at. Anyway, this is all good. What we did, since we found nothing here, is we took 2 of our oxygen sensors and swapped them cylinder to cylinder so that we can go look at another pull and find out if maybe it was the sensor that was giving us that really lean reading on number 8. The number 8 cylinder is still reading lean on our sensor, and so we don't think the sensor's bad because we swapped them cylinder to cylinder, and so we're gonna do something we've never done before. One way to attempt to richen one cylinder in an engine is to change just that jet in the carburetor that's nearby. It's not that effective on a manifold like this. What we're gonna do is go enlarge this hole in the spray bar that's pointing towards that number 8 cylinder and see if we can put more gasoline into that cylinder. Here's our final pull with this thing after we were messing around so hard trying to get that number 8 cylinder rich. He drilled that oversized hole in the spray bar, and honestly, it did nothing. But let's start with the horsepower, and then we'll explain that. This made 772 horsepower and 737 pound-feet of torque. The problem is this tune. We still didn't get that hole any richer.
No, it's, you know, past experience, it's hard to tune a single 4-barrel manifold with an issue in one hole. It's hard to get things diverted to just a single cylinder.
Yeah.
With a tunnel ram, you can poke around right over every cylinder, but with a single 4-barrel, it's tough.
Let's pull up that graph so we can have a look at exactly what happened. This is a little confusing. This is air-fuel ratio in each individual cylinder. Red is before we started all our like extreme tune-up tactics, and black is after. You can see we really couldn't affect the shape of what any one cylinder was doing with this thing.
No, and the spike we're seeing here, that's when the nitrous is activated. We've talked about that, where it goes leaner momentarily for 2 or 3/10 of a second. Then it settles back in. That's also the horsepower spike. It'll make more power there, but not for a long period of time when it's that lean. But this cylinder here, we just, you know, we got maybe a 1/10 or 2 change out of, but really almost nothing.
Didn't. So, and we know that it's not the sensor. It could be the box that's reading it. We'll maybe find that out when we put the next unit on. By the way, we know it's not this carburetor doing this because we've run this thing on 187,000 dyno pulls. So it's not that. I think the bottom line here is that you cannot pick one cylinder off with a plate, and we just need to move on. All right, we're going to give up on solving that and move on to the perimeter plate system and see if that fixes anything. Changing the plate. At a baseline power of 560 horsepower, we hit the button and turned that into 789.8 horsepower and 750 pound-feet of torque. So that's really good, but we know that nitrous makes power. The story is in the tune-up. Now, this is a air-fuel ratio curve for every cylinder in the engine. Higher is leaner, lower is richer. This spike right here is when we hit the nitrous button. The nitrous gets into the engine before the fuel. It goes lean. So really what we're looking at is down here. We do have one fairly rich hole at about 11.5 or 11.7 to 1. And the leanest that we get is 13.4 to 1. This is safe and good, and the grouping is tighter than what we had with that other plate. And our tune-up's identical. So we're looking at same jet, same fuel pressure, same ignition timing, same carburetor jetting, and it's just happier with the perimeter plate system. So I guess to conclude, No one's going to drive around with a plate system at this power level and actually have O2 sensors cylinder to cylinder. And I think the first thing to comment on that is people have used spray bar nitrous plates for millennia. I mean, they've been around for decades.
We used them 40 years ago.
We used them 40 years ago. We use them forever. Everyone's put a zillion laps on them. And in general, you don't kill holes, or if you do, you're looking at spark plugs and you know that that's a risk. So I guess what I'm saying is we saw that one cylinder. The spark plug didn't tell us that it was in any kind of distress. You know, the O2 sensor did, the spark plug didn't.
Right.
40 years ago, you would have looked at that spark plug and gone, I'm golden, and run it, and you would have never had a problem. But we do know now, which is why we end up being happier with the perimeter plate in this application, because I guess the data just makes us feel more warm and fuzzy.
And that's really some tough power to outrun anywhere. You put that on the street, who's going to run with you?
Yeah, it's pretty good. Man, I love nitrous. We need to test more with nitrous. Oh, you know what we have? I want to do a fogger so that we can individually tune each cylinder.
Yes.
You know what? That's a promise. We will do that on a future episode of Engine Masters.
Hello, xin chào tất cả các bạn nha. Lại là mình này, đã ra những video hay cho các bạn xem. Các bạn ơi, các bạn thấy hay thì hãy like và mình tút kênh của mình thật hay nha. Cảm ơn các bạn đã theo dõi kênh của mình. Thank you các bạn. Chúc bạn có một buổi xem live thật vui vẻ.
Vô tình đụng phải vợ đang thắng, nuôi chồng hoảng sợ vội quay đầu sang một bên. Không phải do người vợ không đủ xinh đẹp hay tính cách bạo lực, mà là người đàn ông đã coi cô ta như một cái điện thoại trước mặt bà. Vợ anh đã đánh mất bạn trai cũ sau lưng
Không
anh,
biết,
là chú rể
không kết nối cam bao giờ. Em không kết nối cam bao giờ, không biết. Nhà em có lắp cam đâu, có mỗi cái của nhà thông nó lắp để đấy rồi thôi. Chủ yếu xem ai đi ra đi vào.
Cả chiếc gươm nhỏ trên tay vợ và đứa con trong bụng cô cũng là quà cưới của bạn trai cũ. Chú rể dù không biết đứa trẻ có phải người lính hay không, nhưng vẫn kết hôn với người phụ nữ đó. Người đàn ông thúc giục cực rằng Thủy Yêu bị thương tấn mà não người Thủy Yêu lại không ăn được miệng. Ông chỉ có thể thay Thủy Yêu sống dưới đáy nước tập tối, còn Thủy Yêu mang dáng vẻ của anh để lên ra trải nghiệm làm người. Trong đó, Thủy Yêu nói với người đàn ông muốn lấy lại. Thực ra thì trong một năm phải kéo 99 ngày sống suốt nếu có hạn.
Không mưa.
Quay trở lại,
Thế Nga bảo không mưa. Thì chắc ở nhà tạnh rồi. Chắc nhà mưa tí thôi. Chắc là chỉ mưa tí thôi. nay chủ nhật mà, nay được nghỉ. Tuần mấy tuần trước không được nghỉ, tuần này nghỉ ở nhà chung ông. Ừ. Trên viện gia đình. Bệnh tuổi già, đổ nhiều bệnh lắm. Tai biến giờ lại thêm tràn dịch phổi nữa, bị phổi nữa. Đủ các loại bệnh. Đi gọi là lững thững thôi, của người dìu. Giờ chắc chả đi được nữa.
Hôm qua tao đi viện với chứ.
Các cụ già đến tuổi. Ừ. Ừ. Chắc thế bị trắng não. Ừ. Ông nhắm à? Chưa. Gần 70. Ông nội thì cao thôi, chứ ông ngoại còn trẻ. Ông ngoại bà ngoại trẻ nhưng mà cái bệnh tai biến nó dài nhanh lắm. Ừ, xuống sắc, xuống nhìn cơ thể chứ nó xuống nhanh á, nhìn cứ như kiểu là 80. Ừ. Các cụ già cứ khỏe làm sao chỉ chấm ngã bệnh cái là đi ngay, nó đề kháng không còn nữa. Không hồi lại.
Ngay trước khi bước vào ánh sáng mặt trời, người đàn ông đột nhiên dừng lại, dường như ánh sáng mặt trời trước mắt như một con thú dữ. Không ngờ cảnh này tôi hay bị một giáo sĩ gần đó chứng kiến. Dracula thấy vậy cố gắng kìm nén sự hoảng loạn, vội vàng gật đầu chào với ông ta, sau đó liền quay người rời đi một cách nhanh chóng. Nhưng giáo sĩ đã bị thu hút, ngay lập tức rút đi theo. Dracula chạy trốn khắp nơi trong bóng tối, nhưng dù anh ta có trốn đến đâu, giáo sĩ vẫn bám sát không rời. Trong lúc hoảng loạn, Dracula lại hít vào một tiệm đèn, cuối cùng phát hiện không có cửa sau. Khi anh ta đang tìm kiếm lối thoát khác, giáo sĩ đã đến sau lưng anh ta. Ma
Xin chào và hẹn gặp lại các bạn nha. Mình sẽ kết thúc video tại đây. Cảm ơn các bạn đã theo dõi kênh của mình.